My parents missed my 9-year-old son's funeral to taste wedding cake, then had the absolute audacity to sit at my kitchen table and demand his $1.8 million trust fund for my sister's wedding. They thought my grief made me weak and compliant, but they forgot I'm a senior compliance analyst, so I handed them a forensic audit and a federal fraud investigation instead. My son, Leo, died on a Thursday. My parents were at a cake tasting. Nobody had called them away. There was absolutely nothing pressing to interrupt them. Leo took his last breath at 4:47 p.m. Exactly 5 minutes later, at 4:52 p.m. My mother texted a laughing emoji about lemon buttercream to our family group chat. That was the chat that used to be for birthday reminders and Sunday dinner plans. That's how close we supposedly were. That's how little my son's final moments mattered to them. I didn't answer the text. I just sat on a hard plastic chair in a sterile hospital hallway, held my husband Ben's hand, and listened to a nurse gently ask if we wanted a chaplain. Somewhere across town, my mother was deciding between lemon and almond frosting. 9 months later, I sat at my parents' kitchen table in the black dress I still hadn't brought myself to give away. My father had a spreadsheet printed on heavy, expensive cardstock. The corners were squared off perfectly, like he'd trimmed them with a metal ruler. He slid it across the island toward me the exact same way you'd hand someone a corporate job offer. "We've been waiting on you," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Let's keep this calm, Maya." "I am calm," I told him, my voice completely flat. That scared him significantly more than yelling would have. I watched the statement land, watched his jaw tighten in response. My sister, Chloe, sat across from me in her actual wedding gown. Not a photo of it on her phone, but the physical dress, fresh from a final fitting appointment just 3 blocks away. She was dabbing her eyes with a folded tissue, crying perfectly without smudging a single line of her expensive mascara. She had never cried once while my son was dying. Not at the hospital, not at the funeral. But she could cry on command for a spreadsheet. She'd always been incredibly good at crying for an audience. "Before we talk about my son's money," I said, my voice eerily steady, "we're going to talk about my son." My mother's hand went flat on the table, bracing herself. My father opened his mouth, desperately trying to redirect the conversation somewhere safer, somewhere transactional. I didn't let him. I reached down into my tote bag and lifted the thick black binder I'd brought, the one with 4 meticulously color-coded tabs, and set it right beside his cardstock spreadsheet. It looked like a verdict resting beside a desperate plea. To understand why that binder existed, and why it made my mother's hands eventually start shaking uncontrollably, you have to go back. You have to understand who we were before any of this nightmare unfolded. Back when I still foolishly believed my family loved my son the way I loved him, enough to show up, enough to fight for him, enough to at least put down the damn cake fork when the phone rang. My husband Ben and I met in Oak Ridge, Pennsylvania, at a community college night class neither of us technically needed, accounting for small business owners. Ben was studying to become an electrician, taking the class because his uncle told him every smart tradesman needed to understand a balance sheet. I was already working toward my corporate compliance certification. We got married 18 months later in his mother's backyard. We had 40 guests, a rented white tent, and a cake his older sister baked herself. My parents came. My mother cried real tears that time, telling everyone at the reception that she'd never seen me happier. Leo was born 3 years into our marriage. He was 7 pounds 2 ounces, with a full head of thick dark hair that made the delivery room nurse laugh out loud. My mother held him in the hospital for 40 straight minutes before anyone else got a turn. My father, a retired corporate accountant, opened a savings account for him that same week, seeding it with $4,000 from his own pocket. He proudly called it Grandpa's college fund. For a long time, I genuinely believed my parents were the kind of grandparents who showed up. They came to his early birthdays. They babysat on weekends so Ben and I could go to dinner and remember we were a couple. My mother kept a dedicated drawer of Leo's finger paintings at her house, labeled by year in her neat, cursive handwriting. But there was always an undercurrent. Chloe is 5 years younger than me, and growing up, she was the golden child in that quiet, structural way that never gets named out loud but shapes your entire childhood anyway. She got the bigger bedroom with the ensuite. She got the expensive dance lessons I never got to take. When she failed out of her first semester of college, my parents cheerfully called it finding herself. When I changed my major once during my sophomore year, my father sat me down for a stern, hour-long lecture about throwing away my future. Chloe floated from job to job well into her mid-20s, a boutique, a marketing internship that went nowhere, a stretch of almost a year where she consulted without any actual clients. My parents subsidized all of her living expenses without ever calling it what it was, an allowance. I didn't actively resent her for it. I had my own life. I had Ben, and eventually, I had Leo. My parents' blatant favoritism felt like background noise rather than an active wound. The clearest early example of it involved our college tuition. I paid my own way through community college and then a state university, working 30 hours a week at a call center through both. I graduated with $14,000 in student loans, which I proudly finished paying off the year before Leo was born. Chloe, on the other hand, enrolled in a private, out-of-state university my parents chose for her, at a staggering cost of $35,000 a year. When she dropped out after just 3 semesters, my father simply absorbed the massive financial loss and never mentioned it again. Not even the time I asked, half joking, if there might be a comparable fund somewhere to help with a down payment on a house for Ben and me. He just patted my shoulder and told me I'd turned out fine on my own, which I understood even then to be a compliment deliberately shaped like a door closing in my face. The incident that should have warned me about everything happened 3 years before Leo got sick, at my great-grandmother Eleanor's 85th birthday party. Eleanor was my father's grandmother, and she was as sharp as a scalpel even at 85. She was the kind of woman who noticed absolutely everything and said very little. She pulled me into her kitchen that afternoon while the rest of the family ate cake in the backyard. She told me she was setting up something significant for the great-grandchildren. Not for your parents to touch, she said, her eyes locking onto mine. For the kids. When I go, I want it locked down incredibly tight, so nobody with a bright idea can get their greedy hands on it. I laughed a little, assuming she meant it as a general, sweeping precaution. I didn't understand yet that she meant my father specifically. Eleanor died 8 months later. It wasn't until the reading of her estate that I learned she had left an irrevocable trust of $1.8 million for Leo, who was her only great-grandchild at the time. It was meticulously structured so that it couldn't be touched, redirected, or borrowed against by anyone except a court-appointed trustee acting in Leo's sole, verifiable interest. And she had named me as the trustee. Not my father. Me. My father did not take it well. He never said so directly, that wasn't his style, but for months afterward, he made passive-aggressive comments at family dinners about how some financial decisions get made without the full family's input, and how he'd always assumed Eleanor's estate would come back together for whoever in the family needed it most. I naively told myself it was just grief talking. I didn't know I was listening to a contingency plan being drafted out loud, one Sunday dinner at a time. Leo was diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia 2 years after that, just 3 weeks after his 7th birthday. He had been unusually tired for a month, bruising way too easily on his shins. I will never forget the pediatrician's face when the blood work came back. It was the careful, heavily rehearsed calm of a medical professional about to completely obliterate your reality. After the diagnosis, Leo carried a stuffed gray elephant named Milton everywhere. Through every terrifying appointment, every agonizing infusion, every sleepless overnight stay. Milton's primary job, according to Leo, was protecting the vein. He said it with such total seriousness, like Milton had been formally hired for a crucial position and took the work personally. Ben and I effectively moved into Mount Hope Children's Hospital for the next 2 years. Ben took unpaid leave from his electrical company twice, nearly bankrupting us. I worked remotely from an uncomfortable vinyl chair beside Leo's bed, running complex corporate compliance audits on a laptop balanced precariously on a rolling tray table while heart monitors beeped rhythmically beside me. My parents visited exactly twice in that entire 2-year span. I know the exact number because, somewhere in the 3rd month of treatment, my analytical brain took over and I started keeping a meticulous log without fully admitting to myself why. 102 minutes. That was their combined time spent with their dying grandson across 2 single visits. My mother brought a cheap coloring book the first time, complained about the hospital parking fees, and left before Leo even finished coloring the first page. Chloe visited 0 times. 0. She got engaged to her boyfriend Josh during Leo's 4th month of treatment, and from that exact moment forward, her wedding became the only subject that existed in my family's universe. Venue tours, cake tastings, floral arrangements. She posted a photo of a lavish charcuterie board online the exact same afternoon Leo had a Mediport surgically placed in his chest under general anesthesia. I remember standing in a freezing hospital hallway, staring at that photo on my phone. My son was unconscious 2 floors up, fighting for his life. My sister was captioning a spread of imported prosciutto and manchego cheese with 3 sparkling heart emojis. I texted her that night. He's scared. I wrote, "Can you please call him tomorrow? He misses his aunt." She answered in the family group chat 20 minutes later, completely ignoring my message, asking whether anyone had strong opinions on lemon versus almond cake. Nobody in the chat mentioned my son. I put my phone face down on the tray table and just wept into my hands. The escalation of their betrayal didn't happen all at once. It happened in calculated stages. The first stage came during Leo's 10th month of treatment, right after his oncologist started using the word remission out loud for the first time. I should have been relieved, but that same week, my father called to ask if he and my mother could be added as backup authorized contacts on Leo's medical paperwork. "Just in case," he said smoothly. "For insurance purposes, since your mother and I are still his grandparents and we should be fully in the system if there's an emergency." He casually asked for Leo's full legal name, his exact date of birth, and his social security number, which he claimed the insurance company required for the authorization form. I didn't think twice. My father had spent 30 years as a corporate accountant. He understood paperwork vastly better than I did. I emailed him the numbers that same afternoon, sitting in the hospital cafeteria, genuinely grateful that he was finally trying to be involved in Leo's care. A week later, my mother asked for a certified copy of Leo's birth certificate for our own home records, in case anything happens to you and Ben and someone needs it quickly. I ordered a second certified copy from the county and mailed it to her without asking why she needed the original document instead of a simple photocopy. I gave them absolutely everything they asked for. I trusted them with my son's entire legal identity because they were his grandparents, and because it never once occurred to my exhausted, grief-stricken brain that my trust was the exact currency they were counting on to rob him. The second stage came 3 months later when Leo violently relapsed. The word aggressive entered our daily vocabulary, along with the word limited, spoken by an oncologist who chose his sentences with the particular, devastating gentleness doctors use when they are preparing you for a pediatric funeral. I called my mother from the hospital parking garage, sobbing so hard I could barely breathe. I could hear her television blaring in the background, some home renovation show, and the volume remained completely unmuted for the entire call. When I finished explaining what the doctor had said about Leo's plummeting survival odds, there was a long pause. Then she asked whether Chloe should plan a fall wedding or wait until the following spring, since these things take a full year to plan properly, and Chloe really doesn't want to rush the aesthetic. I stood in that concrete parking garage, the freezing wind whipping around me, waiting for her to circle back to the fact that her grandson was going to die. She never did. I sent a follow-up text a few days later, spelling out Leo's terminal prognosis in plain, unmistakable language. She replied with a single, generic thumbs-up emoji. The third stage arrived when Chloe asked me to be a bridesmaid. I said yes, because some deeply broken part of me still desperately wanted to believe we could be a normal family. The dress fitting was scheduled for a Tuesday in March, the exact same week Leo was readmitted to the ICU with a fever that wouldn't break. I called Chloe, crying, explaining I couldn't make the fitting because Leo's white blood cell counts were dangerously low and I needed to be by his bedside. She was quiet for a moment, then sighed heavily. "I know this is a hard time for you, Maya," she said, "but this is kind of a really hard time for me, too. I've been planning this aesthetic for over a year." I didn't argue. I just asked the bridal shop to email me the measurements. 20 minutes later, as I watched a nurse push a crash cart past Leo's door, Chloe texted me a photo of bridesmaid dresses lined up on a rack. The caption read, "Which one do you like best? Sorry you're missing this," with 2 exclamation points that felt like a physical knife to the gut. The fourth stage, the one that finally revealed the absolute monster my father was, happened during Leo's final relapse. The word limited had stopped being a possibility and had become a rigid timeline. My father called me, Instead of asking how much pain Leo was in, he asked how the estate situation was progressing. He wanted to know whether the trustee paperwork had settled into a permanent legal structure yet. When I asked him what the hell he meant, he cleared his throat. I just want to make sure the family's resources stay flexible enough to help whoever needs it most right now. Eleanor would have wanted that money to serve the living, Maya, not sit locked away in a trust for a situation that might not resolve the way we're hoping. I hung up the phone. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, vibrating with pure shock. He was actively doing financial math on my child's life expectancy. He was treating my son's impending death as a liquidity event. Leo died on October 12th, at 4:47 in the afternoon. He had Milton the elephant wedged under his arm exactly where he liked him. I held his small, fragile hand as it went cold. 5 minutes after he stopped breathing, my mother sent the laughing emoji about the lemon buttercream. I found out later that my parents had spent that entire final week of Leo's life aggressively finalizing venue deposits for Chloe's wedding. They signed a $15,000 contract for a luxury barn venue in Philly on the Monday. Leo slipped into a coma. They signed a $5,000 floral contract on the Wednesday his organs started failing. They signed a $7,000 contract for a photographer who specialized in golden hour love stories on the exact morning of his funeral. 11 people came to Leo's funeral. My parents sent a cheap bouquet from a grocery store, the kind with the crinkly plastic sleeve still creased around the stems. The generic card read, "Thinking of you both," without mentioning Leo's name once. That same afternoon, while Ben and I stood at a freshly dug graveside in the freezing rain, my parents and Chloe were toasting champagne at the new barn venue 3 towns over. Chloe posted a video of it that evening, golden light, clinking crystal glasses, and a caption that read, "A successful new beginning for our family." I read the word family until my eyes blurred. 2 weeks after the funeral, the inevitable envelope arrived from Eleanor's estate attorney. It confirmed that Leo's trust, now that its sole beneficiary had passed, would transfer under a contingency structure Eleanor had brilliantly specified years earlier. It named me as the sole trustee of the $1.8 million, with absolute discretion over its distribution to either charitable purposes or future great-grandchildren. My parents were completely locked out. We told no one. But 3 weeks later, my mother stopped by our house to drop off a casserole, a pathetic performance of grandmotherly concern. While I was in the bathroom, she systematically rifled through a stack of unopened mail on my hallway table and found the trust attorney's letter. She called me the second she got home. "We need to talk about the trust," she demanded, skipping any greeting. "Your sister's wedding is falling apart financially while that money just sits there doing absolutely nothing. That money is connected to my dead son," I whispered, my voice shaking with rage. "It's all that's left of him. He's gone, Maya," she snapped, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. "Chloe is still here. She has a future ahead of her. Don't you want to see something good come out of all this tragedy?" I hung up. I didn't cry. The wall I needed for what came next had finally finished being built. Within a week, Chloe posted a vague, tear-jerking update on social media about an unexpected family tragedy that had put a massive financial strain on her wedding planning. She never named Leo. A GoFundMe appeared 4 days later, set up by one of her college friends, titled "Help Chloe Rebuild After Family Tragedy," with a goal of $12,000. The description included a single, grainy photo of Chloe crying at what I instantly recognized as Leo's graveside, a photo taken from a distance without my consent. The fundraiser pulled in $7,500 in 10 days from strangers who thought they were helping a grieving aunt. I didn't scream. I didn't call them. I opened my laptop and I went to work. I am a senior compliance analyst. I spend my life reading complex financial records for the tiny, hidden patterns that corrupt people hope no one will ever notice. I had never turned that terrifying skill on my own family, but now, it was a campaign, and campaigns leave paper trails. I started with the hospital visitor logs. The front desk printed them for me, 102 minutes across 2 years. I highlighted them in yellow and put them in a black binder under a tab labeled Mother. I exported our joint family text threads, preserving the timestamps perfectly. The buttercream text at 4:52 p.m. glowed like a radioactive accusation. I laid them beside the venue contract dates I legally requested through the estate attorney. The timeline built itself. But I knew there was more. The money for those massive wedding deposits had to come from somewhere before the GoFundMe. I hired a ruthless, independent forensic accountant named David Chen. I gave him the venue contracts, the GoFundMe records, and bank statements I had tricked my parents into giving me months earlier under the guise of settling Leo's medical bills. David worked in silence for 11 days. When he finally called me, his voice was deathly serious. "Maya, I need you to sit down." 4 months into Leo's chemotherapy, a personal loan for $55,000 had been quietly opened at a regional credit union in Oak Ridge. The loan wasn't in my father's name. It wasn't in my mother's. It was opened in Leo's name. They used his social security number, his exact date of birth, and the certified copy of his birth certificate as identity verification. The exact documents they had requested from me for insurance purposes. A 7-year-old boy, throwing up from radiation, had a $55,000 loan opened in his name. It was co-signed with a signature the credit union had on file as his legal guardian, a signature that was not mine, and not Ben's. My father had explicitly forged my signature to guarantee the fraudulent loan. David walked me through the brutal disbursements. $10,000 to a luxury bridal boutique in Philly. $7,000 to the barn venue as an initial hold. $5,500 to a high-end jeweler for Chloe's custom-set wedding band. The rest was slowly bled out in untraceable cash advances over the following year. A slow, parasitic bleed of money from an account that belonged to a dying child who couldn't even spell the word loan. David sent me a 43-page encrypted file, formatted exactly how I would have formatted it for a federal audit. I printed all 43 pages at 2 a.m., the printer humming while Ben slept upstairs. Holding proof that your parents are literal monsters changes your DNA. I called Detective Marcus Vance in the Financial Crimes Unit. I laid it out flat and factual. He listened, silent, then said, "Maya, this is felony identity theft of a minor. Using a deceased minor's identity to secure a loan is a massive federal offense on top of the state wire fraud charges. I can open a file today." I told him to open it. That was the document clipped to the back of my binder. Which brings us back to the kitchen table. My mother reading the header of the detective's file upside down. The color draining from her face like a pulled plug. Where did you get that? She whispered, terrified. From a forensic accountant, a bank's fraud department, and a detective in the financial crimes unit, I said, my voice echoing in the dead silent kitchen. Would you like me to read it out loud, or should I just hand it to Dad, since his signature is the one on the guarantee that isn't actually his? My father's face completely emptied out. All the arrogant composure, the squared-off cardstock spreadsheet, the pitch meeting authority, it all vanished. He looked old, pathetic, and suddenly very frightened. His hand started shaking violently. Maya, whatever you think you found. There's a reasonable explanation. He stammered. I'd love to hear it. I smiled, a dead, cold smile. I'm incredibly curious what explanation covers opening a $55,000 loan in a 7-year-old's name and forging my signature to guarantee it. Chloe's fake crying stopped instantly. It was like someone cut her audio cord. She looked at our father, then at our mother. The sheer vertigo of realizing her entire perfect aesthetic was funded by federal fraud washed over her. What loan? She demanded, her voice losing its practiced victim tremor. Dad, what the hell is she talking about? He didn't answer. His silence was a confession. I looked at Chloe. You didn't know the exact mechanics, I said, my tone clinical. But you knew a $10,000 dress and a $7,000 venue deposit magically appeared during my son's chemotherapy, and you never once asked where the money came from. That's not innocent, Chloe. That's just a more comfortable kind of guilt. My mother found her spine, resorting to her old tactic of attacking when cornered. You're going to destroy this entire family over money that boy never even got to spend. She shrieked. He's gone, Maya. He doesn't need it. We do. The room went so still I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Say his name, I commanded. My mother blinked. What? You haven't said his name once. Not today. Not in 9 months. Say it. She opened her mouth, and for a terrifying second, I thought she had actually forgotten it. Leo, she finally choked out. This isn't about Leo. She tried to pivot. It has never been about anything else. I slammed my hand on the table. You missed a cake tasting for him exactly 0 times. You missed every infusion, every night he screamed in pain. But you found the time to open a fraudulent loan in his name. You were never going to pay it back. You were going to let the debt die with him and hope nobody with my training ever looked. I laid out my terms. The GoFundMe comes down within 24 hours. Every single donor refunded with a public message naming exactly what happened. A written statement, signed and notarized, acknowledging they have 0 claim to the trust. Full repayment of the $55,000 fraudulent loan through a structured plan drafted by my attorney. And Detective Vance's file would remain open, unresolved, hanging over their heads like a guillotine. And if we do all that, my father whispered, you'll close the police file? I didn't say that, I replied, standing up and grabbing my binder. I said the file stays open. What I do with it depends on if you ever cross me again. I love this family, but I know what my son deserved, and none of you gave it to him. That's not something a spreadsheet fixes. I walked out. Nobody followed me. The next 6 weeks were a spectacular, slow-motion collapse. Chloe took the GoFundMe down at 2 a.m. that night. She posted a public apology stating the funds were solicited under false pretenses regarding her nephew's death. She drained her entire personal savings to wire back the $7,500 to the stranger she had scammed. It was the first time in her life she faced an actual consequence. Her fiancé, Josh, found out about the fraud 9 days later. Not from me, but from an automated credit inquiry that flagged the credit union's internal fraud investigation on a joint account they shared. He called Chloe, demanded the truth, and she confessed everything. Josh postponed the wedding indefinitely 2 days later. He told her he couldn't legally bind himself to a family capable of stealing from a dying child. They are currently separated, and the $15,000 venue deposit was surrendered entirely due to a strict no-refund clause my father hopelessly tried to fight in small claims court and lost. My parents' financial ruin was absolute. The $55,000 loan, combined with another $11,000 in credit card debt David Chen found they had also opened in Leo's name, put them massively underwater. The credit union froze their accounts. My father spent the autumn desperately withdrawing from his 401k, eating massive early withdrawal penalties, just to meet the draconian repayment plan my attorney forced him to sign to keep him out of federal prison. He tried one last, pathetic move. He hired a cheap lawyer to petition the probate court, arguing my emotional state following a bereavement made me unfit to manage the $1.8 million trust. The judge spent exactly 4 minutes reading the file before laughing him out of the courtroom, noting dryly on the record that my father's own admitted financial misconduct made him the last person who should be questioning anyone's fitness. I never pressed criminal charges. Not out of forgiveness, but because putting a 64-year-old man in prison would turn Leo's name into a trashy local news headline. I wanted Leo to remain a name spoken with love, not a case number. But my father knows the detective's file is sitting there, documented forever. That invisible leash has destroyed his ego permanently. It's been a year. I used $250,000 of the trust to establish the Leo Milton Fund at Mount Hope Children's Hospital, covering lodging and parking for low-income parents who refuse to leave their sick children's side. The rest remains locked down tight, exactly as Eleanor wanted. I haven't spoken to my parents since that day at the kitchen table. My mother sends a generic Christmas card. I throw it in the trash unopened. Chloe and I occasionally text, very carefully. She visits Leo's grave now. I don't know if I'll ever fully forgive her, but the silence in my life without their toxic performance of a family is the most peaceful thing I've ever felt. Ben and I are healing. Milton the elephant sits on a shelf in our living room, watching over us. And my black binder sits securely in my home office, safe proof that when it mattered most, I didn't look away, and I made the monsters pay.